Well, good morning and welcome to the next Menopause Morning. This is our new time for the Menopause Morning. It's going to be every Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. Pacific time. So it is actually Menopause Morning for those on the East Coast as well. 11 a.m. for those on the East Coast. Today's a huge subject. There's very little understanding, I believe, out there in conventional thoughts in regard to estrogens. And really, especially when you, as a woman who's, if you're watching this, you're probably either in menopause, maybe at least perimenopause, menopause, or postmenopausal. But there's very little understanding about estrogens throughout this period. And and let me kind of preface this as well is whether you believe in God or some other higher power, what I want you to recognize is whatever that higher power is for you, your female body has been created perfectly from an estrogen perspective. You see, when you're in childbearing years, you have your most prominent need for estrogens for having the ability to conceive and to carry a child and birth a healthy child. Estradiol plays a significant role. Now, even in childbearing years, you still want the estriol to be your most dominant of your estrogens. And it's really how the E1, E2, and E3 work together. So that's estrone, estradiol, and estriol. Now the big difference, though, is in childbearing years, you have a different recognition of how much you need as compared to menopausal years. So, as an example, while you're in childbearing years, you want your estrone to be somewhere between, like, let's say, 5 and 25. You want your estradiol, which is the E2, somewhere between, let's say, 3 and 7. And you still want your estriol, which again is your it should be your most dominant of your estrogens, somewhere between like 8 and, let's say, 29, as an example. And your total estrogens would be somewhere between, let's say, 15 and 60. Okay. Now that's different than when you're postmenopausal. And what's the key here? Let's go back to what you've heard me say many, many times. Is the simple fact is that when you transition from childbearing years into perimenopause and menopause and postmenopausal, the only two true symptoms of that is you no longer have a monthly cycle and you can't conceive. All right. So with that as the fact, you don't need the same production of these hormones. You don't need the same amount of the E1, E2, and E3, which is the estrone, the estradiol, and also the estriol. And those, by comparison, the estrone, which again, remember, in childbearing years, it'd be somewhere between like 5 and 25, but postmenopausally, it'd be somewhere between like 1 and 6. And the estradiol, which in childbearing years would be somewhere between, let's say, 3 and 7. From a postmenopausal perspective, it would be somewhere between, let's say, like 1 and 3. So obviously significant less. And your estriol, which should always be the most dominant of your estrogens, would be, instead of somewhere between, let's say, 8 and 29, it would be somewhere between 1 and 6, as an example. And the total of all the estrogens added up, instead of being between 15 and 60, it would be between 2 and 16. So that's a big difference. And the recognition, too, is why the estradiol is the one that gets all of the kind of the publicity, so to say. Is there is a simple thing to recognize, is that when you're transitioning from, again, perimenopause, from childbearing years into perimenopause, and then eventually menopause and postmenopausal, what I want you to really recognize is that during childbearing years, the estradiol is very important, because that's basically essential for women, for yourself as a woman during childbearing years. So the estradiol specifically is more about regulating, it's a master regulator of fertility. It drives ovulation. It creates a thickening of the uterine lining for the embryo implantation. And it's really maintaining early pregnancy development. Yeah, so the estradiol does play a significant role during childbearing years. So now remember, your body was created perfectly. All right, so when you make that transition, when you no longer are having a monthly cycle and you can't conceive anymore, your ovaries stop that production of the estradiol. And what's so interesting with this is that more of the production of that really then ends up being tied directly into what's going on from a perspective with your body is now going to produce most prominently estrone, which is the E1. Now, what's important with this is the estrone is primarily produced in your adrenals, and it can be produced in fat cells as well. Now, and this is so important because as you go into perimenopause and menopause, the estrone is the main estrogen hormone. You see, and again, it's going to be it should be most notably produced in the adrenal glands, and then secondarily in your fat tissue. You know, if you've been watching the Menopause Morning, you've heard me talk about this many times. Is that, like as an example, when women gain weight during menopause, it's because your adrenals are already burnt out from probably the last 30 years of being a woman, which means you were probably overstressed and overworked and overwhelmed. Yeah, because it's unfortunate because that's often a woman's life. And I've seen this because I've literally I've looked at well over 8,000 hormone test kits in my career. And what I recognize, most women, the 30 years prior to menopause, you could probably relate with this, is you spend 30 years, 30 plus years taking care of your children, your spouse or your significant other, your home. Very often you're involved in your church or community. Oh, and you work a full-time job too. So with that said, what this means is that for a high percentage of women, probably equal to the amount of percentage of women who are actually dealing with other symptoms that we refer to as menopausal symptoms, like the weight gain, the hot flashes, the mood swings, the sleeplessness, the brain fog, and so on. This is really because your adrenal glands are working. And now it puts more of a necessity to create this estrone from fat. So then your body will just basically pile on the fat in hopes of maintaining some level of hormone balance. And the problem with this is it's not efficient enough to be the main producer of the estrone. So that's a big thing that is obviously very important to recognize. Now, when we think of the estrone, this is very important for your adrenals and your fat to produce this because this is what compensates for the sharp decline in the ovarian estrogen as you're making this transition. So it's helping to maintain proper bone density. It's supporting your cardiovascular health. It helps preserve your skin, your vaginal tissue, and so much more. Now, as far as the estradiol, which is usually the primary recommendation, and the purpose of this is typically for postmenopausal women to replace the estrogen the ovaries stop making. Now, this is the question I want you to ask yourself, though. Since your body was created by God or whatever you believe is your higher power, once your ovaries stop this production, this is a natural shift. This is a natural transition. Yeah. So, and remember, you needed the estradiol more specifically for childbearing years, to be able to get pregnant, to be able to, especially that first trimester, to be able to carry that child, to have a healthy childbirth, right? So, the way it's looked at, and this is what I want you to kind of question for yourself, is if your body is naturally stopping the production of the estradiol in the ovaries, but then it's making more, and it should be making more of the estrone in the adrenal glands and your fat tissue. And then that can easily be converted into estradiol as needed, or converted, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, converted into estriol. These are all the important factors that you have to really think about. Now, when women are using estradiol, it's usually used primarily for vasomotor kind of symptoms. So the hot flashes, as an example. It's interesting. If you look things up online like this, it'll talk about hot flashes or night sweats. If you want to know the difference of what a hot flash is and a night sweat, it's just a few videos back in this podcast where I talked about that, because those are very different things. The night sweat is not a hormonal issue. I want you to recognize that, something very different. But the hot flashes are something that happens to women. Now, also, estradiol specifically is often used for vaginal dryness, itching, pain during intercourse, or maybe even we could use to help prevent osteoporosis with bone density. So, understanding that, again, the important factor here is postmenopausally, you're going to produce most of your estrone in your adrenals. Well, it should be producing most in the adrenals and then in fat. The estradiol will be more specifically be conversions from estrone, but then we also have the estriol. Excuse me. So now, typically, estriol, which is the E3, is primarily used by postmenopausal women to treat symptoms such as, dryness or painful vaginal dryness or painful intercourse. It also targets local tissues more effectively. So sometimes it could be used for sleep disturbances, skin rejuvenation, because when applied topically, it simulates more like localized collagen production, helps to like maybe increase thin skin thickness and reduces wrinkles and dryness associated with aging. And it is also what is known as a weak or short acting estrogen, the estriol. Now, what's great about that is it often provides relief symptoms without causing the same level of endometrial or breast tissue stimulation as estradiol would do or estrone would do. And the other thing too is that the estriol's interaction with estrogen receptors in the brain is another reason it's often included in discussions about cognitive symptoms like brain fog, as an example, or really any other kind of brain disorder. And it's interesting because in the like conventional wisdom out there, you're always told that, well, it has to be estriol. Yeah, but the simple fact is, remember, the way your body works, and when we're looking at this from strictly from a natural creative perspective, and kind of I believe that we've been created and we've evolved over time. So I want you to really recognize that your body has been designed perfectly. Yeah, the big problem comes in with all of this is that for most women that are dealing with any kind of what you consider a menopause symptom, is you're basically dealing with adrenal glands that can't produce the estrone that you need. So you don't have proper estrone. Now you need more fat to try to compensate, which still isn't going to maintain the perfect production that you need, because most of it should be coming from your adrenals. And then once you have the estrone, your body, and more specifically your liver, has the ability to convert this estrone into any needed estradiol and estriol in your body. Yeah, so they're all important. I want you to really recognize this, and this is where it becomes a question of when you're just using estradiol, and it's interesting because I think in today's society we want to look at the most obvious thing and think that's the answer. And if you think as you go from transitioning from childbearing years into perimenopause and menopause and postmenopausal, your ovaries will be producing less estradiol. Well, no kidding. You're not going to, you don't have the ability to conceive. You're not going to have a monthly cycle. You don't need the same level of estradiol. And your body still has the ability, when you're producing adequate amounts of estrone, your body has the perfect ability, mostly through your liver, to convert that estrone into estradiol and to estrone as needed. Yeah, which is a very important aspect for you. And so when we want to look at this, I want to show you a good visual here. This will help kind of pull things together. So these are some graphs. This is an example of the testing that I use in my clinic with women that are they're somewhere in this transition from childbearing years into perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopausal. Now, what I want you to recognize is the graphs on the bottom are the graphs that are the reference ranges of where you should be. The graphs on the top are an example of where, one particular woman in my practice is. Now, what I first want you to understand, whether you're in childbearing years or perimenopause or menopausal or postmenopause, that very first graph where you see the green and the purple, that's the ratio of your estrogens. Throughout your entire female life, you really want the ratios to be correct. So you want the E1 and E2, which is the combination of your estrone and your estradiol. Well, if you add those two up, you want that to be equal to or less than the total E3, which is the estriol. So remember, the E3 is the weaker of the estrogens. Now, that doesn't mean it can't do its job. It just means it's not as potentially problematic as the too high of estrone or too high of estradiol. And now with this particular result that we're looking at, we're seeing a woman who her ratios are off, where her E1 and E2 are significantly higher. You want the green to be at least 50% or more. And this is an example where the green is only about like 28, 30%, right? So this is an imbalance in the estrogens. And again, because there isn't enough of a focus on the liver or on really what's going on with balancing estrogens. The focus tends to be only on taking estradiol, right? Now, the next one, which is where it says basically estrogen hydroxylation. Now, this is a key point for really every woman from this perspective, because when we think of hydroxylation of estrogens, it's when there's a hormone detoxification where your liver and different enzymes in your liver, they play a role in the conversion of molecules like estradiol and estrone and even estriol. So hydroxylation occurs through there's three different metabolic pathways. And there's either something, and it's interesting. They're referred to as more an easy way to think of this. It's the good, the bad, and the ugly. So when you have one form of hydroxylation where the metabolites are generally weaker and less active, this is really the preferred pathway. This is what allows your body to have that higher level of estriol, at least 50%, comparatively speaking to, again, the sum of your E1 and E2. So remember, that's adding up your estrone and your estradiol should be equal to or less than the total of your estriol, which is your E3. So that's recognized as the good pathway. This keeps everything in balance of where it should be. Now, the bad pathway is where the metabolites, they're really transforming into what can cause DNA damage and increased risk of hormone-related cancers. So this is something called, now the good pathway is called a 2-hydroxylation, and the bad pathway is called a 4-hydroxylation. And that's where there could be a risk and a higher level of what are known as carcinogenic estrogens, which are cancer-causing estrogens. Like there's a lot of women who can't take the estradiol, and they're recommended to not take estradiol because of a history of breast cancer. And then it is all of a sudden recognized as, oh no, you don't want to touch the estradiol, right? Now, then the ugly pathway is called a 16-alpha hydroxylation. And basically what this means is, and again, this is just really tied into what your liver is doing. And these metabolites remain highly active, and they can overstimulate estrogen receptors. And this is often associated with increased cell proliferation. So really, when we think about the key of this, the balance between these pathways is critical for you, because the ratios of the metabolites, it really kind of dictates that overall estrogen tone and disease risk. So now there are other factors such as genetics and environmental toxins, diet, body composition, infections in the body, inflammatory conditions. Like there's a lot that ties into this. But what I really want you to recognize is that your liver plays the most dominant role in what's going to happen with these estrogens, right? Which is such a key. And again, going back to how your body is perfectly designed, once your ovaries stop the production of the estradiol, you still have estradiol in your body, but most of it is going to come from a conversion of the estrone into estradiol in the liver. And then also and they can convert back and forth as needed. That's what's kind of cool about your female body is you have this ability to convert back and forth between these estrogens in the liver. And you're going to also recognize that your body and your liver specifically has the ability to also convert into estriol. Remember, that's the weaker of the hormones. That's the one that you want the higher level in your body. Now, what's also interesting about this is this does create like strategies for shifting estrogen, like the estrogen pathway balance through the use of like diet and supplements and what's going on with your functional health, what's going on with your liver health. But I also want you to recognize that there's also something outside of the phase one metabolism. It's also a phase two metabolism, which is methylation. And that's required to neutralize these metabolites that we're talking about here. Yeah, so that's where we get into what's on here as well. So you see this third graph that looks like the gas gauge. This is a recognition of the methylation ratio and the methylation pathway. So remember, one of the jobs of methylation is to again get to really process these estrogens and get them out of the body, right? So rather than building up estrogens and having other significant issues with this, remember, some of the estrogens can create challenges with DNA, with cell proliferation. It can lead to problems with heart disease, and it can lead to problems with potential cancers, and literally the list goes on. Well, according to this test that I'm showing you here, that gas gauge should be at about 2/3 of a tank. And we're looking at a person here who is like not even at an eighth of a tank. So this is a person who their estrogen ratios are out of balance. There's a very high, the red in the middle graph, the red is carcinogenic estrogens. You want that to be your 7% or less. So that's then a risk factor for breast cancer. That's the OH4 response that I talked about before. And then the yellow, which can tie into cardiovascular disease, can easily tie into poor bone health, like osteopenia, osteoporosis. This should be at 20%, and for this person, it's only at 3%. If that yellow is too high or too low, those are significant risk factors for your health. And then let's remember that the methylation is a key component of getting these estrogens out of the liver and out of the body. So if you're at only like not even an eighth of a tank instead of 2/3 of a tank, that's a big issue, right? And I wanted to really bring this up today because I want you to understand that yes, all of your estrogens are important. And again, to repeat, during childbearing years, your estradiol plays a huge role in you being able to get pregnant, to conceive, to carry that baby, and to have a healthy childbirth. So the estradiol is very important from that perspective. And that's why your body has been designed that once you're transitioning from childbearing years into perimenopause, the ovaries aren't going to make that same quantity of estradiol. But you still need estradiol in the right balance because, again, it's still about the balance of the estrogens. And let's remember that your estradiol is going to be a conversion from estrone into estradiol primarily in your liver. And then let's also remember that whether you're in childbearing years or perimenopause or menopause or postmenopausal, your most prominent of your estrogens needs to be your E3, which is estriol. And you just don't ever hear about this, right? And I think there's this like overall like mainstream freak out of, oh, the ovaries aren't producing the estradiol, so we need to give you more estradiol. Well, it's not about it's not about having the estrogen levels of a childbearing woman. when you're in a postmenopausal state. It just, it's one of those things that, again, you want the balance of. You need enough estrone, you need enough estradiol, and you need enough estriol. And the primary key to all of this as you're transitioning again into perimenopause and menopause and postmenopausal is tied into your adrenals and your liver. So if your adrenals are healthy and your liver is healthy, you're going to produce the estrone. The estrone in your liver has the ability to convert into the estradiol and the estriol, and your body keeps you in perfect health. And when that's happening, when you have all of that working correctly, what I want you to understand is now your body has the ability to enjoy the only two true symptoms of menopause, which is you stop having a monthly cycle and you can't conceive anymore. And what I really want you to recognize is that the symptoms that you're told are menopausal symptoms, the weight gain, the hot flashes, the sleeplessness, the brain fog, the mood swings, like the list goes on. This is because your adrenals and your liver aren't working well. And it's interesting is that it's about 2 million women enter menopause in the US every year. And approximately 15% of those women have no symptoms short of the only two true symptoms of menopause, which remember is you stop having a monthly cycle and you can't conceive. So that means the other 85% of the women, what you're really dealing with is not necessarily missing an estradiol cream or a patch. You're missing healthy adrenal function. You're missing healthy liver function. And you can support your life. You can support your body functionally. You can support your body through diet, through fundamentals of health, through your functional health. You can get to what triggers are causing this for you and allow your body to be that perfect creation that it's been meant to be. And in the end here, I just want to help you recognize too, you need all three estrogens. You need the proper amount of estrone, you need the proper amount of estradiol, and you need the proper amount of estriol. And you need them in the right ratios, and you need your liver functioning properly and your methylation to be functioning properly to allow this to happen. And let's remember the importance of your adrenal glands in this whole process. So with that said, I thank you for taking the time out of your day with this. If you're watching the recording of this and you have questions, regardless of whether you're catching this on YouTube or Facebook, or maybe some of the snippets that are made of this on Instagram or other areas. If you have any questions, just please put the question in the comments below, and I will address all those questions personally. And hopefully with today's discussion, you have a deeper understanding of estrogens and how these estrogens are affected by you transitioning, again, from childbearing years through perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopausal. And it gives you a little bit of a blueprint of how to look at this in general and to look at everything that's really going on. So, and always underneath this, in the comments below, I will put a list. If you want to join the Menopause Morning, you can click on the link below in the comments, and that'll get you on the Menopause Morning list, where I basically either the night before or the morning before, I will actually email you what the subject line for that particular Tuesday Menopause Morning talk is going to be, and give you a link of where you can go and watch this on Facebook, where it's actually showing up live on Tuesdays. And when you join live, remember you have the ability to ask questions and to make comments as well. And when you join the Menopause Morning list, you will also get a free copy of the electronic version of my book called Fat, Fatigued, and Frustrated, which is an action step guide to really addressing the fundamental aspects of what you need to find balance in to really start your journey toward perfect hormone balance. So with that said, have a great day. Hopefully you learned a lot today, and you can take this and create really the health and the hormone balance that you're looking for. Have a great day.